Hi, BitChute viewers. Before the video begins, I want to share a special discount offer on BitChute memberships. Go ad-free, enjoy a VPN, and support free speech and privacy. Use the link in the description to get your yearly memberships. Enjoy.
It is December 2nd, 2025, and once again, Russian President Putin is being misquoted by the mainstream media as they claim that he is essentially calling for war with Europe, when in reality, he just said that Russia has no plans to attack Europe, but that they would be ready if Europe wanted to pursue a full on war, because of course they have to be prepared for anything at the end of the day. Now, this also comes as you have Putin meeting in person with a delegation from the US, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who managed to weasel his way into that one. A lot of eyes on this meeting wondering what it will mean for the state of a possible peace deal between the US and Russia that Kiev and European politicians are trying to get their hands on and trying to essentially ruin. But then the question still remains of whether a deal is even possible in the first place, as the West has made it clear that they do not take Russia's security concerns seriously. So, what does all of that mean for the current conflict? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier. So, let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst and national security expert. Larry, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Always honored by the invitation. Thanks for having me.
I'm always happy to have you on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as Russian President Putin is being misquoted once again in the Western media after he called out Europe for hindering U.S. efforts to achieve a settlement by refusing to offer a serious proposal. And he said, quote, Russia has no intention of going to war with European countries, but if Europe wants war, Russia is ready. So, how do you view the Russian president's statement, especially as it's coming ahead of his meeting with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner coming from the US today, and really the message that Putin is trying to send to the West?
Well, this follows on the heels of, was it Kaya Kallas's claims the other day, where she said, uh, Russia hasn't been attacked in 100 years, but Russia's attacked 19 other countries. And it's like, good Lord. And so I put a piece up at Sonar 21, but the way my mind works, I start hearing music. And the music I was hearing was Sam Cooke's rendition of Don't Know Much About History. It's a Wonderful World, which actually was written as a footnote, written by Lou Adler and Herb Alpert. But the Sam Cooke sang it. And here's Kaya Kallas. She could be singing Don't Know Much About History, don't know much about biology, and she certainly doesn't know anything about war. Because the reality is Russia has not had a history of invading Europe. And people point to the end of World War II. Well, it took all those countries on its perimeter. Yeah, it created a buffer zone because it had been invaded multiple times previously, apart from what took place in 1941. Had been invaded by the West in 1918, 1919. British and American troops showed up in 1921 trying to overthrow the Bolshevik rule. They'd been attacked by Japan. They were attacked by the Brits and Crimea. And then let's not forget Napoleon coming in with Waterloo. So, to be worried about being attacked, it's not being paranoid. It's just been, hey, this has been the history. And yet throughout that period, Russia they never went into, the only time they went in and conquered Germany was they conquered half of Germany in 1945. They finished off what was started by Mr. Hitler and others. So, here's Kaya Kallas trying to create this false impression. And the Russians keep saying, we're not interested. I mean, they've got enough territory. They don't need natural resources. And they don't want to go up and have to suddenly be responsible for a bunch of people sporting pink, blue, or green hair. And trying to figure out what gender they are. Russia doesn't need that. They want to be left alone. And that's the problem. Europe, Europe's like that pesky kid you knew in elementary school. Can't keep their hands to themselves. Constantly got to be attempting to molest somebody else. And so, as Putin said, I have no plans to attack. We're not going to. But if you attack us, we will respond. And they are prepared to do so.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to me to watch some of these European politicians who continue to not only support the war in Ukraine, yes, but to take it that step further to act like, oh, Putin is about to attack all of Europe any day now. And you even had NATO's most senior military officer telling the Financial Times recently that the alliance is considering being more aggressive toward Russia, and that could include everything from cyber attacks to even a preemptive strike that they would frame as some sort of defensive action. Not really sure how that works, but I mean, how insane is it? The comments that we're hearing from NATO, we know that they are not backed up by any kind of weapons or any kind of capabilities to actually take on a war with Russia, aside from, I guess, if they want to go to a nuclear war and just end it all. But I mean, how do you view this increase in comments that we're getting from NATO officials?
That's like an annoying chihuahua. There's some great videos, and I'll get them posted later. I got Rottweilers. That's my dogs, and there are a couple of videos out there of this one Rottweiler, big boy, sitting there trying to sleep, and this Chihuahua is just going yap 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 yap. Finally, the dog raises his head, goes up, picks the Chihuahua up by the nape of his neck, and he's laying next to a swimming pool. The dog walks over to the pool and then flips the Chihuahua up in the air into the swimming pool. And the dog stops barking. That's Europe. Europe, they can make all this noise and they can sound vicious, but they don't have an industrial capability. I mean, they can't even keep Ukraine supplied with artillery shells. They don't provide replacement barrels for our howitzers that have need to be replaced. Tanks don't work. Armored personnel carriers don't. I mean, they don't have anything to offer. So yeah, they can make all the threats they want, but what I found fascinating was the European reaction to the 28-point peace plan, because one of their amendments and suggestions was, oh yeah, Ukraine needs an 800,000 man army. So I went and did the math. I looked up the size of the British army, the size of the French army, and the size of the German army. Those three armies combined aren't even 500,000. But they want Ukraine, which only now has 19 million people in it. It used to have like 43 million, but a lot have left. Some have been killed. They want Ukraine at 19 million to provide an army that is bigger than those three countries combined. In fact, the only way to get up to 800,000 would be to include Turkey. Turkey right now has the second largest army in NATO at 320,000. U.S. has the number one. So it shows how divorced from reality these people are. Germany of late, they've been trying to demonstrate that they could actually mobilize troops to threaten Russia. And, they were supposed to demonstrate that they could cross a bridge, and it was a complete failure. They were unable to do it. So they think that they'd be looking at building up a military presence in Ukraine over a course of 3 years. Russia's not going to stand by and let that happen. So, I mean, that's what I say. The Europeans, they're either taking some illegal narcotic substance that's affecting their judgment, or they're just flat out ignorant.
Yeah, it's crazy to me the way they act like one day that the Russian military is on the verge of falling apart and can't do anything, and then the next moment they're like, oh yeah, they're about to march on our doorstep. We need to just keep this war going further and further. And as you have all that happening, as you have the chihuahuas barking, you also have President Putin meeting with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, in Moscow today, following a meeting between U.S. and Ukrainian officials that took place in Florida on Sunday. Now, I'm always a little wary anytime I see Jared Kushner anywhere, but the last time that Witkoff and Putin met, Witkoff presented a proposal that was used as the basis of Trump and Putin's in-person meeting in Alaska back in August. So, how do you see the hopes for moving forward with a potential deal as we have these ongoing talks between the delegation coming from the US and top Russian officials?
I don't see a deal happening because the West is not willing to accept Russia's terms. And Russia is not setting out terms that are, I guess, a foundation for negotiation. They got five basic demands. Demand number one is that in addition to Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk are recognized as permanent parts of the Russian Federation. Putin's not in a position to say, "Oh, I'll give those back," because the people voted and the Duma approved the referendum, and so they were officially under the Russian Constitution brought in. So that's number one. Those territories are permanently Russia. Number two, NATO needs to get the hell out of Ukraine, remove its bases, remove its personnel, and vow never to let Ukraine come into NATO. Connected to that, number three, Ukraine needs to um, cut its army down to about less than 100,000. They agreed in March of 2022, the Russians and Ukrainians, at a number of 85,000. But that's the demilitarization part. Then there have to be new elections, and the new elections mean that there can't be any people who are followers or believers in that little corporal from Austria who was in command of Germany back in 1941 and 42. None of that ideology is going to be tolerated and allowed. Um, and so those are the basic positions that Russia is insisting on those. Those aren't negotiable. They don't say, okay, yeah, you can keep it in the books that Ukraine can get into NATO. No NATO. NATO needs to back off, get away from our border, leave us alone, and stop pointing your guns at us. And so, to the extent can the United States, I think Witkoff would say, okay, that's fair, but Ukraine is not going to accept it right now. And that's why Putin has said, look, either we'll get this concluded diplomatically or we'll do it militarily. And that's why I think it's going to be militarily, because under the current situation, I don't see Zelensky is accepting it. Now, there's some rumors that Zelensky's on his way out, and reportedly they're going to replace him with Zaluzhny, the former general who's been serving as Ukraine's ambassador in London. Well, big problem there. Zaluzhny is more closely tied to the Azovs and the right sectors and these people that are adherents of that old political movement in Germany from the 1940s. So, and plus, he can't just be appointed president. Russia is going to insist that whoever's there has to be elected, but the election's got to be monitored in such a way that none of the folks with that unfortunate ideology that was espoused by the likes of Bandera is allowed in government. Then Russia, it's important for people to remember Russia agreed in March of 2022 that Ukraine could keep the Donbass. They could keep Donetsk and Luhansk. All they had to do was assure that the civil rights of the Russian speakers would be protected, that the language would be part of the official language of Ukraine, and that the military of Ukraine would be sharply reduced, and they'd stay out of NATO. And actually they had a tentative agreement on those points until Biden sent Lloyd Austin to meet with Boris Johnson, and then Boris Johnson went and told Zelensky, no uncertain terms, you do that, you'll not have any place to flee. We're cutting you off. So the West sabotaged it. So Russia has shown in the past that it was willing to make some gesture. They made those gestures. It was rebuffed. So now they've extended it and they've added to those demands. It's tougher demands. And Putin said just within the last 6 months, this deal that's on the table now, if you don't take that, the next step, and this is, I believe, where we're going, Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, Kharkiv, Sumy, and possibly Poltava will be given the chance to vote to join the Russian Federation. And I suspect they will vote to join the Russian Federation because there's no future in Ukraine. And Russia will take control of Kiev, or Kiev, as people like to call it, and Odessa. That's where this is going to end. Russia will be in solid control from Odessa all the way up to the eastern shore of the Dnieper River. And, Ukraine, if Ukraine survives, it's even questionable whether they can survive because, they in 2010, they had 43 million people. Now they're down to 19 million. So that's an enormous loss of population, and plus with the number of young men killed, the likelihood of a baby boom is not there. So it's a dying population.
Yeah, it really has been interesting to watch as this has come about. And I'm with you. You see what Russia offered back in early 2022 when they were like, look, we don't want to continue this war, right? We want to make a deal with you. We've been saying that for months. And then the West said no. And then even now, you look at the proposals that are being reported in the media. And of course, we don't know exactly what is being presented to Russia. But when you look at what's in the media, I'm going, these are not serious, right? To include these vague security guarantees for Ukraine or to claim that, oh, the sanctions on Russia will be lifted as a case by case basis if NATO approves of their actions. There's no reason for Russia to agree to any of these deals because they are actively wearing down Kiev's forces. And there's really nothing in the grand scheme of things that the NATO alliance can do about it. And I'm curious, when you look at Russia and kind of exactly as you were laying it out there, right? That doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but that is the route that we're going down. I know that some people are concerned that Russia is either going to agree to some sort of a deal or that they're not going to go all the way to Odessa or that they're going to kind of stop short. How do you see those concerns and really what Russia is looking at when it comes to the big picture?
Well, I understand why they believe that based upon, Putin's been fooled a couple of times in the past. The last time we saw a diplomatic push like this was in January of 2015, when the Battle of Debaltseve was unfolding. The militias in Luhansk and Donetsk had the Ukrainian army surrounded, pinned down in a cauldron, and they were defeating them severely. 6 days before the end of that battle, Angela Merkel flew to Moscow, met with Putin, and basically persuaded Putin to sign on to Minsk II. Not as it was the agreement wasn't between Russia and Ukraine. The agreement Minsk II was between the government of Ukraine and the let's call it the oblasts of Donetsk and Luhansk. But Putin was one of the guarantors of it, as was France and Germany and Belarus. Well, as Putin later learned, that it was all a sham. Merkel said in December of 2022 that, yeah, we just did that to buy time for Ukraine to re-equip, rearm, recruit, etc. And so Putin recognized he's been fooled once. And so, the old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And so Putin's recognized, okay, I've been played once. This ain't going to happen. I did find it, he was pretty funny last week when he did that press conference at the end of the summit of the CSTO, the different countries and their security agreement. When he was asked about, because one of the principles of that 28-point plan was, hey, we'll let you join the G8 again. We've been the G7, but now you get to be part of the G8. And his answer was essentially, you got to be kidding me. Why would I want to join that group of losers? I mean, basically, that's what he said. He goes, "They don't have anything we need." He says, "We're already part of BRICS, and BRICS is, basically kicking their rear end. We got more people, we got a faster growing economies, we got higher growth rate. No, uh, I G7, forget about it. It's like, hey, you've got the chance to go to Disney World, or you can go have a colonoscopy. What's offering you the colonoscopy? And people are going, I don't want that. That's Putin.
Yeah, I just love the fact that they really thought that they would
Yeah,
throw it in there and be like, "Oh, if we invite you back to our little club that we kicked you out of when we weren't happy with you," it's like, no, Russia doesn't want to go back. They're not going to just end this war and be like, "Oh, we get to be in the G8 again." But that level of thinking that we're seeing from NATO has been, interesting to watch as we're also kind of keeping an eye on what's happening in Kiev, because you've got Zelensky in Ireland today for what is essentially a pep rally and the small fundraiser. But back home in Kiev, his world is falling apart, and it has been over the last couple of weeks. You've got his chief of staff and really kind of his guard dog, Andrei Yermak, resigning last week in a growing corruption scandal that is eating away at his inner circle. So, how do you view the position that Zelensky is in right now? And do you think that his days are officially numbered?
yes, I do. I think, in fact, the initial leak about the $100 million and getting NABU, their National Bureau. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically the Corruption Bureau to investigate political corruption. When that 100 million leaked, because I'm privy to information about uh, there's actually a criminal investigation that the Pentagon is involved with, or the Department of War in Ukraine, that is looking at $48 billion that have gone missing out of a total of 360 billion that Ukraine has received over the course of the last 4 years. So to go out and leak 100 million as if that's a big deal, yeah, it's because this money, the way this worked is the Zelensky government, and Yermak wasn't the only one. The money was siphoned off and then sent to the banks in the Baltics, in Estonia in particular, I believe. And then from there, it was laundered. And by laundering, it was moved to shell companies. And then payments were made to people, including at least 23 members of the U.S. Congress, both Senate and House, getting millions, multiple millions. Um, so the money was spread around. They were buying, I guarantee you, that there are senior members of the EU. Ursula von der Leyen, I wouldn't be surprised if she's on the take. Kaya Kallas, I wouldn't be surprised if she's getting a little bonus for her efforts. Um, so that's what, the heat is on now. And I think the reason that was leaked out was to put Zelensky on notice. We'll see what, let's keep an eye on Yermak. If he's still alive by the end of next week, then I think that means definitely Zelensky's days are numbered, because Yermak is going to put the finger on him. He's not going to take the fall. He's going to, I'm sure he's kept some receipts to show who's actually to blame. And, they've got evidence about, U.S. senators. I'm sure they're going to trade. He'll trade out that information that is a way to save himself. So this isn't over, and but corruption is just one aspect of it. When you look at the writings of Clausewitz, who wrote the book von Clausewitz on war, really the winning a war entails three elements, not just what you do militarily on the battlefield and capturing territory. Uh, One, maintaining the morale of the public, that the public believe it's something worth fighting for. Well, you're not seeing that in Ukraine. Instead, you're seeing these collection gangs that go around tackling people, hog tying them, and throwing them in the back of a truck. And you're now recruited. But the other element, the third element, is economic. Do you have the money to pay for the war? Do you have the industrial production to produce what you need? Or do you have the backers that can give you those things? And on that count, Ukraine is in a complete collapse. Um, at least 30% of their economy previously was supplied from river traffic. Barges going down the Dnieper River to the Black Sea. Well, that's been closed off now for 3 years. And Russia, by virtue of controlling Zaporizhia and farther south in Kherson, completely shut the waterway down. Now, Russia doesn't need it for its economy, but Ukraine certainly does. The Ukraine's debt to GDP, 4 years ago, I think their debt to GDP was like 30%, maybe. Now it's over 125% and anticipated to be 136% this year. And so the way to think about that is for every every dollar, if you spend $100, you're gonna, or if you get $100 in income, you're spending at least $136. That's unsustainable. You'll run out of money, and that's in fact most wars end not because of defeats on the battlefield, because the other side's exhausted. It can no longer fund it. Now, Ukraine is relying upon the West keep the money flowing. Trump's not going to do that. And Europe can't do that. Not that they don't want to, but they don't have the financial depth. They don't have the industrial base. And they certainly, all of them are the UK, France, and Germany, they're struggling economically.
Yeah, it's very telling as you're watching the US in this position and Kiev in this position. I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, the smart thing for the West to try to do would be to make a deal. And it seems like there's a few in the Trump administration who get it. Maybe Steve Witkoff, because he has sat down and spent hours and hours talking face to face to Putin and he kind of understands. And there are days when I think Trump maybe kind of gets it. The last thing I wanted to bring up is just the position that the US is in right now and the Trump administration's ability to. I mean, I look at them and I go, okay, are you guys going to get serious and try to make a deal before everything in Kiev falls apart? Are you going to try to back out of this and just go, oh, it's Europe's problem now and act as though you have no involvement when it comes to Kiev? How do you see kind of the US and their handling of the current situation with this conflict?
I think they're going to try to back out. Uh, I do believe that Trump notoriously is accused of not reading, but I think he does read one thing: polls. And the polls are not good for him. Uh, he is shredding and shedding the support, particularly among the under 40 crowd, the 20 to 40 crowd. And two of those, the issue is both support, the unvarnished, uncritical support for Israel first. That has alienated a large number, but then also perceived as his efforts to continue wars that he promised to end, or wars to keep us out of. At the same time, like he's threatening Venezuela to go to war there. So if he can extricate himself from Ukraine, and it's real simple, stop sending them money, and apparently they have. I just saw a notice from Steve Bryan who confirmed that Pentagon now, even funds that were approved under Biden, they've cut them off. So no more money's going to Ukraine. They haven't. The Trump administration hasn't made a big public show of this, but if that's true, it's one way for Trump to send Zelensky and company the message: Uncle Sugar is not going to be supplying you with any more sugar. That's done. Um, so if once the U.S. pulls out, Ukraine cannot sustain this war. It will be it will collapse, and then they'll be faced with how do we get back into the good graces of the United States. Um, and Russia, you've heard this frequent criticism about Russia moves so slowly, and the Russian army was incapable because they've only taken a little bit of territory. Um, what It just shows the lack of understanding of people, these military experts in the West, like the Ben Hodges, Dave Petraeus, uh, Mark Hertig, um, Admiral Stavridis. So since the start of the special military operation, Russia didn't start by mobilizing. That's why it was called an SMO. In September of 2022, they did mobilize, 320,000 troops. But since then, they've not done another mobilization where they're calling up 1,000,000, 2,000,000, 3,000,000 reservists, which they absolutely have if needed. That would shift it into a war footing. So as they did that initial mobilization, and then were relying upon conscripts coming in every month and new contract soldiers who signed up. Uh, the army grew and grew and grew until the start of this year about 750,000. Well, one of the reasons in previous years you didn't see massive offensives on 6, 7 different axes on the line of contact is they didn't have enough troops. It wasn't just a matter of enough troops to attack, but if we attack and take control of a city, do you have enough troops to defend it? So, those are the critical factors why Russia was slow until this year. And now, since September, they've taken, it looks like they're close to 1,000 square kilometers of territory. And on top of that, 86 different settlements, villages, towns. They're moving extremely rapidly in Zaporizhia and Kherson. And because the Ukrainians don't have the forces to stop them. And so Ukraine is now having to pick and choose its battles, which then give the Russians a chance that they can make a feint. They can uh, try to portray they're attacking in one area where the Ukrainians are concentrated, and then actually shift their troops to another and attack and force there. And so it forces Ukraine to constantly try to move around personnel that it increasingly has less of. They're doing deficit spending with persons. Uh, they're losing 40,000 killed and wounded a month. They're losing another additional 20 to 40,000 in desertions a month, and they're only recruiting new recruits between 17 and 20,000 a month. So, at worst, they're losing 80,000 a month and only bringing in 20,000 recruits. That means a net loss of 60,000. But whether the number is 40,000 or 60,000, you can't be sustain losing 500,000 men a year when your population is shrinking and stay in the battle. So I mean, this is where it's not just the military part, it's the economic part. When you put those two together, there's no way that Ukraine can sustain this. Absolutely no way.
Yeah, it is not looking good for Zelensky, not looking good for Kiev, and therefore not looking good for the US. And I'm curious to see how long they continue at these negotiations and at what point they kind of wake up and fully see the writing on the wall. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst and national security expert, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll see you again.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.